Deebo Samuel, we knew we were going to have you on anyways. We always love to make a yearly tradition of our fantasy preview with you, but we kind of sped up the process here because Deebo is the first big injury of this fantasy offseason. He has a Jones foot fracture, and it's early at least says 3 to 4 months or so. It's expected to sideline him, and there's tons of just varying parties that are impacted here. Let's start with the man himself, Deebo. So he's definitely one of their most electric playmakers down the stretch, especially last year. He was deservedly kind of viewed in the fantasy community as this huge year 2 breakout. Everybody was about him. If you got him in round 5, you were doing fantastic. But now, should we be worried about him? And, both short and long term, what do you think about this injury for Deebo?
Okay, well, it's a Jones fracture. That means it's actually good news. It's like there's a crack on one of the long, thin bones in your foot, but it doesn't involve a joint. It's not anything below the foot. It should heal in 3 to 4 months. Now, Trent Taylor believed that would happen to him last year. He suffered a Jones fracture, never played again last season, but that was because his body kept rejecting the metals in the screws that they were putting in. He had to have a bunch of different surgeries, so that theoretically shouldn't happen to Deebo. The issue with him that I wonder is conditioning. He's missing June to September. That's when you ramp up and get into football shape. He may not be in football shape until October. Still, I think if he doesn't suffer a setback, he didn't really start producing until the second half of last season anyway. I was thinking he might get to like 1,400 yards from scrimmage before this injury because he's such a big part of their running game. But now, if you sort of figure that maybe he won't produce much in September, maybe figure he still could get to 1,100 yards from scrimmage, I still think he's a player you want to invest in from a fantasy football perspective. And here's why. You always want to look from Kyle Shanahan's perspective. And he likes to feature the players that he picked high or that he spent a lot of money on. Because ultimately, he's picking the players. And when you think about, why does Tevin Coleman start and Raheem Mostert doesn't? Because Kyle Shanahan wanted to sign Tevin Coleman and gave him a lot of money, so he justifies it. Okay, in the Super Bowl, Deebo Samuel got 8 touches, George Kittle got 4. Does that seem kind of strange? Well, Kyle Shanahan drafted Deebo Samuel with the 40th pick and drafted George Kittle in the 5th round. So from Kyle Shanahan's perspective, Deebo is supposed to be the superstar. And even though Kittle has become one, you see they're having a contract dispute, negotiation, whatever you want to call it right now, where Kittle wants to be paid like he's one of the best players in the league, and the Niners want him to give them some sort of a break. And that always makes me nervous going into a season. Say Kittle doesn't hold out, but still, he's due to make a lot of money eventually. Will the 49ers not give him targets in the end zone? Will they try to keep his touchdowns down? I mean, teams have been doing that since the 80s when Al Davis and Marcus Allen got into it about, over like $1 or $2 million. Teams do this. So the way I always looked at it is, Deebo's going to get a lot of touches. He was getting them in the playoffs. He's going to get them next year because Shanahan not only loves him, but put his whole reputation behind him, pounded the table for him, essentially, and said Deebo's going to be a great player. He gets to prove it. Shanahan gets to prove it by calling his number.
Absolutely. And what about long term? Because, there is a slew of injuries here. That, the injury-prone label gets tossed out for certain players. Should owners kind of expect this out of Deebo now? That he's going to be dinged in and out? Or is this one type of thing? The foot injury is so nerve-wracking typically for receivers, but I know you said the Jones one isn't too bad, at least. But for someone that's so explosive and sudden and requires so much, run after the catch ability, is there any type of long-term worries? You mentioned too how Trent Taylor was sidelined with the same injury all year. Could that potentially happen here? I know we're not doctors, but is there any type of long-term concern for you and Deebo as being like an injury-prone type of player, I guess?
Well, that's two different questions. I do think there's an injury-prone question. With this particular injury, first, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I don't know how it happened. I assume it was non-contact. Mm-hmm. When Trent Taylor suffered his injury, someone landed on his foot with cleats on. I saw that. So that was not a non-contact injury. Deebo has broken bones before, but that's because he plays so hard. I've never really seen a wide receiver run as hard and as fearlessly into defenders as he does. Yeah. When he gets the ball in his hands, he really is 5'11", 215, which is bigger and thicker than Raheem Mostert or Tevin Coleman or any running back on the route. He's tough. He's a load to bring down, and he plays like it. So that's why he's broken bones in the past. This, I think, is something different. And if I could speculate on why I think he may have broken a bone, I was talking to a physical therapist like 5-6 years ago when Kevin Durant broke his foot. And what he was saying is a lot of times African American athletes, if they spend a lot of time indoors in Northern California, can become vitamin D deficient because the tone of their skin is built to protect them from serious ultraviolet rays in Africa, where you're like at the equator. So you move to Northern California, you spend a lot of time inside, like during a quarantine. All of a sudden, you're vitamin D deficient. Your bones are a little bit brittle because vitamin D helps you process calcium. And you break a bone cutting and not touching anyone. I don't know if that's the issue, and I'm sure the 49ers are monitoring these players' vitamin D levels. But it's just one thing that popped into my head that a doctor told me before, and then Richie James a few days later breaks his wrist. A lot of guys have been following the government's orders and staying inside, and I'm sure that's going to have an impact on some players this year.
What is up, you Fantasy Wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.